So many are saying that in recent times, there's been a bit of a surge with the government using state resources for autocratic purposes, like stifling democratic institutions such as the opposition or the media. For example, the large number of Enforcement Directorate or CBI investigations, along with using national security services to acquire and plant spyware on the personal devices of government critics. So, are these fears valid, and if so, to what extent?
These concerns are legitimate. But it's not merely about at one level or one tier. It's not merely union government. Take the rule of law. 98% of rule of law in India is at the state level. Most people don't realize it. Unlike the United States, where there are federal crimes and a federal judiciary and a federal investigative system. In India, there's a unified judiciary and unified investigative system entirely under the state control, except the constitutional courts. And therefore, the failure of rule of law or perversion of rule of law is endemic in the country. Much of it is centered in the states. And the union also is now following suit. There's selective prosecution. Even if the people against whom investigative agencies are acting, even if you assume for argument's sake that it's on legitimate grounds, it is selective. That I think cannot be seriously disputed. As we discussed earlier, it is essentially a failure of rule of law. We never in our country institutionalized a framework of genuine rule of law. We talked about it normatively. But how will you institutionalize rule of law? The crime investigative agency must be effective, efficient, smart, and accountable, while being utterly independent and non-partisan. Today it's entirely dependent on political executive and therefore entirely driven by the partisan impulses of those in power. The local MLA most of the times actually calls shot in the local police station. It's not even the state government. Legislator is all powerful. Otherwise, he'll get the inspector of police and the SHO transferred instantly, or even a superintendent of police on occasion. It's the reality of much of India. You take the superintendents of police transfers on average. In many states, every 6 months they get transferred. SHOs transfers. Unless you buy peace and do the bidding of the political masters, you have no survival. Forensics are extremely weak in India. In Delhi, in a highly talked about case, it took 1 year to get a DNA analysis done. In Delhi, national capital, in much talked about case, let alone the rest of the country. There's hardly any forensics. And third degree is habitually used against innocent, poor victims to extract confession. Prosecution is incredibly inefficient. We hardly pay attention to prosecution. It's utterly weak, inept. As a result of all these three, and the failings in the procedural law of the country, and the conduct of judiciary itself, because of incompetence and a certain casualness, multiple adjournments and trivial cases where the evidence is crystal clear. Conviction rate is, without confession, as close to 10 or 15% as possible. It's not even above 10-15%, but one of the lowest in the world. With confessions, it's approaching 25-30%. Tens of thousands are incarcerated in jails without a conviction, merely because they are too poor to pay the bail amount. So there is no justice system in India. There is no crime investigation that's independent in India. So unless you really look at the police, the prosecution, the forensics, the procedures, and the courts comprehensively, I don't think you can overcome this. It's not merely an individual or a party. Each time, whenever somebody is in power, when there's an obvious abuse of power or an alleged abuse of power, we focus attention. We are forgetting institutional factors. And the parties that criticize this abuse of power, they're not saying this is the alternative we provide. There's not even one word that says, look, when we come to office, this is what we're going to do in order to make sure that the police will not be slaves in our hands. They're not saying that. They're only complaining that they're slaves in your hands. Let me take power and they'll be slaves in my hands. I'll use that power now against you. No, that is not democratic politics. So it's a deeper crisis than an individual abusing power. There's no question about it. Some of the other things sometimes are exaggerated, sometimes well. But in general, I think there is a serious failure of rule of law. And without that, it's not the parties, it's not a fight between this party and that party, it's the ordinary citizens. We are not getting what is due to us in an otherwise sensible system of rule of law. and therefore we have given up. And that's the reason why in India, the civil cases are far outnumbered by the criminal cases. In any modern economy, when there's a dispute, you go to court. In India, we refuse to go to court because we know nothing will happen. There's no point spending money. We'd much rather go to a gunda, pay money. He will settle the dispute by rough and ready methods, or to a politician or a policeman, or suffer injustice silently and ignore. Now, that's not a good society, and that's also inimical to economic growth. So we must look at it much deeper than politics. It is fundamental to society's stability, harmony, a sense of justice, and economic growth. And until we realize that as a society and as a political system, I think our economic growth ultimately will be stifled by failure of rule of law.
I see. So on that point, do you think that the recent legislative omission of sedition law from the three criminal law bills is a sign of a change for the better?
Krishna, wording we may dispute whether sedition is the word right to be used or not. Look at the American debate right now. Insurrection. The 14th Amendment American Constitution after Civil War incorporated, it says that if an individual participates in insurrection against the American state or American Constitution, then the person should be disqualified for public office. So Donald Trump, is he qualified or not, is a challenge now. Probably it will be revealed in the next few weeks or months. So what does it mean? That there has to be a standard beyond the traditional crime of killing somebody or stealing some money or robbing somebody. If the constitutional order is sought to be overthrown by unconstitutional methods, should that or should that not constitute a crime? I think the balance of convenience lies in regarding that as a crime. If we think anything goes and vote can sanctify any kind of behavior in those in power or out of power, then society is not safe. Therefore, I think there is a reason why you require some mechanism by which insurrection and violent overthrow of the constitutional order have to be recognized as serious crimes and deal with them. But if we use that routinely, then I think we're undermining our own national security and constitutional order. The problem of India is not that there are certain laws which may be necessary, and certainly they require amendments, the wording can be improved. Sedition typically is associated with the notion of kingship. So we don't have to use such words. But insurrection, violent overthrow of the constitutional order, or even a non-violent overthrow of the fundamental constitutional order by conspiracy, you cannot ignore that. It's a crime.
So can we see the recent mass suspension of the opposition MPs as an extension of the whole autocratic shift that many people are suggesting?
See, we always see the things near to us as very big and forget with time what actually happened earlier. We have been having this kind of an approach for the past 40 years at least. Probably 50 years, closer to 50 years than 40 years. And it is a structural issue. First, we have embraced the Westminster model, where there is a fusion of the executive with the legislature. Whereas theoretically and actually in reality, who are the only people elected in the country by us? Whom are the people of India transferring sovereignty? It's only to legislators at the state or national level. And theoretically, because in reality local governments are utterly feeble and powerless, the local representatives, these are the only people whom we the people are directly electing. So the only transfer of power from the people to elected representatives is through these people. That is theory. But in a Westminster model, the moment the majority forms a government and government commands a majority as long as it survives, the legislature has become now the tool of the executive. It is inherent in the model itself. Now in the West, Britain they had it. Many other Westminster model countries they have it. But they built other institutions and practices and traditions over centuries to mitigate that. The committees work very strongly. There are parliamentary practices followed by both sides. The Speaker's office is absolutely firm, powerful, and neutral. You have no doubt about that. And whether individual members or parties, they have their say, X amount of time is allocated to them. These are all absolutely strong traditions. In India, we never institutionalized them. On top of it, we brought in the anti-defection law. We made the legislators the slaves of the party bosses. And blind opposition, mindless opposition, or support, depending on what the party boss told you, not because you're a legislator elected by the people to represent the people's aspirations and your own judgment. There is zero judgment. A parliament or state assembly today is reduced to a loyalga. I don't even understand why we should meet. Because already what you vote for, whom you vote for, how you vote is decided by the constitutional amendment. The party dictate is inviolable, otherwise you will lose office. You see Justice Ramaswamy impeachment case, way back in 1993. It failed because a whip was issued to prevent impeachment. You see the Muslim women's law. A terrible law was enacted because a whip was imposed. Many members of the Congress party in parliament opposed it, but they knew it was wrong, including the present governor of Kerala. They had to give up their political careers. You see the 64th Amendment introduced by Rajiv Gandhi in 1989 about the local governments. The model is flawed, but the idea is very sound. Despite a massive majority in Lok Sabha, that amendment was defeated by opposition coming together merely because they happened to be in opposition. You see the farm laws. I always said it before and I maintain that now. They're extremely sound laws. Of course, the government bungled by not bringing about a compromise, a consensual approach. But the laws, every economist of any note, every person who understands agricultural economy and agriculture, farming, they all know it's necessary. They're not sufficient. And there's blind opposition, both in parliament and on the street, to the detriment of Indian agriculture. So you see this kind of an approach, which is unrelated to the merits of the case. Whatever be the merits, logic and evidence. If I am in ruling party, I support it blindly. If I am in opposition party, I oppose it blindly. Then why at all parliament? So there's a deeper crisis than suspension of XYZ. And the committee system doesn't work. There's no committee system worth mentioning. It is there in parliament on token, but there's no real empowerment. Woodrow Wilson said about American Parliament, American Congress, he said Congress in session is Congress and exhibition. Congress in committees is Congress at work. We've forgotten that. In the states, though, committees don't matter at all. Other than some committees in state legislature, they're all namesake committees. Even the members don't take them seriously. And local governments are dead. In the absence of local governments, empowered local governments, the MLA's role, MP's role is to become the local government de facto, without the de jure power. So all his time is consumed in pleasing the constituencies to make sure the water supply is there, the drainage is there, the street light is functioning. Is that why we elected the legislator at the state and national level? And finally, electoral system. Crores of rupees spent illegitimately to get elected. So the poor MLA's time is influence peddling. How do I now raise money? How do I make money to make good the losses or expenditure I got? And for the next election. So if you don't look at these things, if you make it party political, then a lot of noise will be generated, a lot of heat will be generated without any light. We must introspect. This is a much deeper, long-term crisis. Our legislatures are dysfunctional, our democracy is messy, highly centralized, but our democracy is still robust because there are still free elections, there are still political freedoms. We must use these two tools and hopefully some amount of honest introspection and genuine search for solutions on the part of the political parties and their bosses to actually resolve the dilemmas rather than blaming each other and making it a warfare on a daily basis.
Thank you.